Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Center for Strategic and International Studies twice on this snowy day in Washington, D.C. This time to talk to Tom Karako, who is the missile defense man here at CSIS. Tom, great event with Lieutenant General Sam Greaves, U.S. Air Force, who's the head of the Missile Defense Agency, and David Trachtenberg, who's the policy deputy. Obviously, you guys were talking about the missile defense review, but first let me ask you a little bit about the INF treaty. The administration is formally going to give notice. We heard from Secretary Pompeo. That follows a very, very long buildup to trigger that 60-day clock that allows the United States, six-month clock that allows the United States to formally withdraw from the treaty. From your standpoint, what's the good, the bad, and the ugly, both the opportunity and the potential risks of the decision?
Well, you know, the ugly is that the INF treaty was a good treaty, and the ugly is that Russia chose to violate it and not come clean on it. If there was an alternate path here, either a negotiated adjustment or something like that. But the ugly is that this is part of a long pattern of disregard for some basic fundamental principles and rules of the international order. You know, we sometimes talk about that in a kind of a glib sense, but you know, the idea that you should abide by your treaties, abide by your word is kind of basic, and so that's the ugly part. The good is that we're doing this, I think, in a very calculated and modulated way, gradual way. I mean, the treaty has a notice that we have to give before we can formally withdraw, but we're actually taking an additional step. Not only have we been kind of patiently waiting for the Russians to do something since we kind of formally called them out in 2014, the Obama administration, but in addition to all that, the Trump administration gave them just an additional 60 days kind of just to give them every opportunity to come back to the table and see if this can't be fixed. And in the meantime, what the United States has done is to have a lot of solidarity with all of our NATO allies. And so NATO has been speaking with one voice on this, that Russia has nobody to blame but itself for its demise, and that this is the right thing to do. You know, it's not necessarily something we want to do because we want to, but it's kind of the right thing to do because we have to.
And so what do you say about, you know, the Russians did take the last 60 days to make the case. We are compliant. This does not violate the treaty. Why does that not? I know you're smiling. I want to smile too, but give the audience a sense on why those claims by the Russians were simply, at the end of the day, obviously a political thing to try to drive a wedge, to try to make the case to a skeptical European public that sees a unilateralist American administration again. But why do the claims that the missile does not violate the treaty, why do they hold no water as far as you're concerned?
Well, first of all, it's not a unilateralist action here. Again, NATO is speaking with one voice. To get all 29 nations to speak on anything requires some heft behind it. And the United States has been consulting with all of its other 28 NATO allies, showing them what they need to show them to say, no kidding, this is a problem. Now, Russia has been kind of throwing some stuff at the wall at the last minute to kind of try to shape a counter-narrative.
They brought journalists over to take a look at the missile, or the tube.
Yeah, they didn't. They threw up on the screen a PowerPoint slide with an alleged cutaway view. Well, look, I can draw a PowerPoint slide of just about anything and put a number of range attached to it. They didn't let the journalists see the missile. Rather, what they showed them was the canister for it. So, you know, if they were serious about this, there was plenty of opportunities, not merely in the past 60 days, but really in the past really 10 years since they've allegedly been violating. So this has been a long time coming, and I wouldn't fall for any of their attempts to bamboozle us at the 11th hour.
From a both offensive and defensive position, what does this mean? We just heard the missile defense review. That was obviously in the works for 2 years before this came, and you spoke. So folks, check out the video of Tom speaking specifically on that a couple of weeks ago, which was a well-watched video. But talk to us a little bit about what the opportunity here is, both on the deployment of U.S. systems, but also what are the challenges and how we have to alter our missile defenses to take into account this key capability, which, by the way, the Chinese aren't covered by the INF treaty anyway, and the Chinese have been investing very heavily in this sector.
Yeah, well, look, the big picture here is changes in capability, but also intent. And it's not just the fact that Russia's acquired a particular missile kind. It's launched from a particular place, but they keep invading their neighbors. You know, they keep starting small wars on their periphery, and it's that attitude, that posture, that intent, combined with all this, combined with this pattern of disregard, combined with the efforts at subverting their neighbors, subverting the internal politics here in the United States, things like that. That's the bigger picture. And so, you know, the counter to that, the goal, of course, is to put together the mix of responses, political, military, offense, defense, that's going to contribute to deterring even that Russian adventurism, so that every single day, Russia or China or whoever wakes up and realizes, today is not a really good day to test the resolve of the United States or of NATO.
Talk to us a little bit about what the key takeaways were today. Obviously, having the person who was one of the point people, Dave Trachtenberg, on this project was great, and also the chief of the Missile Defense Agency. What did you hear what were some of the key messages from your standpoint, and what did you hear that was new? Because that was a long and very in-depth conversation that we had, both on your questioning, but also from reporters, some of whom, and folks who were from around the world. Let me put it that way, from a background standpoint.
Long and in-depth. I hope that's not a euphemism for boring, but we.
No, it was not. It was not. It was interesting, but it was a fulsome discussion.
Yes, it was. It was very conversational. We had a chance to dive into a lot of subjects there. But look, Dave Trachtenberg, very, very thoughtful guy who I think articulated what is the most fundamental issue, which is how do active defenses of various kinds, active and passive defenses of various kinds, contribute to our overall deterrence and defense goals. He really kind of emphasized the utility or the purpose of them to stabilize things, and the utility for ourselves and our allies, even if, and they'll always be finite, but even if they're limited, right? That it raises the threshold for aggression, it introduces uncertainty and all these kinds of things, so that every single day, Russia, China wakes up and says, look, you know, we'd probably be able to get some missiles through, but we're not completely sure about the results of that attack. And so every single day we want them to wake up and say, today's not a good day to do that.
And General Greaves talked about a space-based interceptor and also hit to kill as well. There were studies ongoing with those. Tell us what that means and what we're likely to see, because there are folks who did criticize the review a little bit, saying, hey, look, 2 years, very fulsome in the description. I think that even matches a little bit of your language that you used in explaining it, whereas a lot less with sort of, hey, what's the cure to some of these challenges? The General did talk a little bit about that, and so did Mr. Trachtenberg. Talk to us about what was new coming out of this conversation.
Well, I think what we did is we kind of dug in deep to what was already kind of been on the table with the review and in other places. So yes, there is a 6-month study on space-based interceptors. They'll look at that. They'll look at that again and see if in the near term, medium term, long term, that's something to kind of contribute to the overall architecture. Having said that, I think that the most important thing is that this is the beginning of the attempt to adapt our air and missile defense, active air and missile defenses, to the realities of great power competition. That is not something that's going to be done overnight. It's not something that with a stroke of a pen and a drop of a review that suddenly we're going to have the capabilities to take care of the very robust and diverse air and missile threat spectrum. So this is, the review gets a lot of credit, I think, for opening the aperture to as wide as the threat requires. And now we're going to have to go through there and think about, okay, what's it actually going to take to contribute to the survivability of the joint force, of the combined force with our partners and allies, and as well, you know, what are the layers and what are the different capabilities that we're going to need for the survivability of the elements of the BMDS itself, so that we're pivoting from merely kind of focusing on the limited ballistic missile threat from the likes of Iran and North Korea. We're still doing that, doing more of it, but pivoting to the diverse spectrum of air and missile threats, including those on the regional basis from Russia and China. That's a big pivot, and there's going to be a lot more to come. But the point is, this is a growth area for all the threats that are out there.
I know we don't want it to be a growth area, but it is exactly that. Last question on hypersonics. There was a little bit of a talk about a hypersonic interceptor. There were a few of the reporters who thought that that was a new revelation. Talk to us about hypersonics and where you think the state of where the Russians are, because sometimes the United States has had an ability to miscalculate where their adversaries are going to be. I know, for example, years ago when the Chinese unveiled the J-20, there were some, including Secretary Gates, who said it was a surprise. Friends in Air Force Intelligence said, you know, we had it off by a couple of months, not much more than that in terms of that capability. Talk to us about the Chinese threat and what the Chinese and especially now the new Russian threat, because the Russians claim it's an operational system, and what we're going to have to do to be able to intercept these kind of weapons in the future.
Yeah, so actually I think General Greaves was conspicuously careful in not saying that it would necessarily be a new interceptor. He also didn't say it wouldn't be. He pointed to the study that they're doing the analysis of alternatives that they're doing to look at, you know, how and in what ways could we adapt the airframes of the current several families of systems, whether it's the MSC or the THAAD, for instance, or SM-6 or something like that for endo threats, or do you need some new faster thing? And we had Mike Griffin here a couple months ago, and he kind of talked about a similar thing. And what did he say? He said, look, hypersonic glide vehicles, they may have high maneuvering at the end, for instance, but they have a big period where they're kind of cruising. And Griffin kind of emphasized the utility of killing them there, in the mid-course, as it were. And so in that respect, you need to reach out to the mid-course. And so the question is, how do you get there? What do you forward base it and shoot it up and hope it flies overhead? Do you come at it from above and deorbit and kill it there? Or do you maybe have some kind of a glider that goes up, flies out to it, and then kills it? So they're looking at all those options, as well as kind of, as I said, to adapt the airframes of the things we have today.
Tom Karako of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Tom, always a pleasure. And it was not boring by any stretch of the imagination. That's not what I was saying. But it was a very, very deep conversation and a very good one. Thanks very much for hosting us and having us all over. Absolutely fascinating. Next event for you is when?
Stay tuned. I'm sure we'll have a number of other things related to the MDR, different aspects of it, in the coming weeks and months.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Look forward to having you on again.
Cheers.